Okay, we are now recording. Hello and welcome back to Welty at Home, the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. We are currently exploring Eudora Welty's novels, The Robber Bridegroom and The Ponder Heart. And during the series, we have read and discussed about 40 pages of each book each week. And today we are having our final discussion comparing both novels. I am Anna Traylor, the education specialist at Eudora Welty House and Garden, and we are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer and professor emerita of Millsaps College, for guiding these discussions. Just some quick housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of the screen and select raise hand. If you're on a tablet or a phone, you may have to tap the screen for this option to appear. And a lively discussion often takes place in the chat as well. So be sure to glance over that box every now and again. Suzanne, where shall we begin?
All right. Well, our friend and fellow book club member and art historian, Susan Shands, brought up the illustrations in the Ponder Heart last time, and Pearl McHaney is going to tell us something about those illustrations, which were done by Joe Crush. Have I got the name right? Yeah. Okay, so Pearl, I'm going to let you take over and talk about that, and then I'll come back on.
Okay. Well, Anna posted this piece that one of my graduate students who was working on the Eudora Welty Review wrote about Joe Crush, interviewed him by telephone, and talked about how he and Welty had communicated about those drawings. And she sent him some photographs, and then she also went out and took some photographs that would give him the sense of the place, what the town looked like. So you have on this whole sort of spread on the cover of the original book, and Anna's going to show you some of those pictures, but you can see this little town. Well, Anna's going to show you a much better way. Anyway, so and then she wrote on the back of these new photographs that this is like Peacock, or this, she sent the picture of the beautiful girl on the swing on the porch. She said, well, this is the way Bonnie D would lounge around, kind of thing. This is the whatever going on. She commented on some of his initial drawings that, well, the name of the hotel is Beulah, not not Polk. Polk is the name of the town. So she corrected him. And then when I looked, I said, oh, well, I guess he just elided the whole name of the hotel. And this picture, anyway, that you're seeing on your screen, that is from the porch of the Beulah Hotel. But I also think it's very interesting on, if you can zoom in on the mean cotton right above the title, it has the telephone number, and the telephone is 27. So showing what a small town this is. I don't know if you can see that. Go a little bit right there. Yeah, I don't have a pointer right there. Anyway, so but it's just delightful that Crush who was hired by Harcourt to illustrate this book and other books and worked for them, drew these things, trying to give the sense of the place. He even had offered to come to Mississippi to see what it was like, but I don't think that he ended up doing that. He could stay in New York and see Welty's pictures. So it kind of gives you this idea of what it looked like. And interesting to know that it's based on Welty's photographs. But Anna put that link into the email message, so you could read that further.
Did you want to show the other image there it is, of Bonnie D?
Welty said she especially liked Bonnie D.
Is this Edna Earl? Are we to assume that's Edna Earl?
I think so. And then down in the other corner is probably the Ponder House. Earlier, that's up on a hill.
This one right here? Or
yeah, right there. Oh, you're very technically astute with that.
I think I'm learning as I go.
Thank God for young people is all I have to say.
And the car that they go out in.
And then here's
Well,
another image.
when Chodoroff and Fields were doing their adaptation of the novella for the stage, they came to Jackson, and then Eudora also sent them pictures for them to think about as they were working on the.
Notice in that picture, there's no Uncle Daniel, or maybe that's him at the door. And
Maybe
she's on the couch with the fireball underneath.
the fireball, yeah. And there's this one, Uncle Daniel as well.
His money.
I think that's all the ones that I scanned.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
Thanks, Anna. Well, we'll see if anyone wants to talk about these. Susan, do you have any comments about this? You sent us on this track. We can't hear you.
Sorry. Yes, I just want to commend that article to everyone because it's really interesting. And if you go back to the 1989, the two photos of Canton are really just, it's number 66 and 69. You can see exactly where he got the outlines of the building. So I think it just shows that Eudora was interested in the visual as well as the written, and she wanted to make sure, that it was done correctly. So Pearl, thank you so much. I love that.
I think that's right. She has a very visual imagination, I think. All right. I had two things I wanted to talk about with the Ponder Heart before we go on and compare. And one is that this whole business of the trial, that the marriage is on trial, and then there's literally a trial, and what Welty is doing here. And I think Jane was right to point out to us last time that this is a lighthearted piece. It was very popular locally. It was produced locally. It was not seen as any kind of biting satire at all. The humor was gentle, but I do think that Welty is putting small town life and small town justice on trial here. And we find out that the Ponders pretty much control the courtroom one way or another. They feel threatened by Doris Gladney coming in. They feel threatened because the judge is from somewhere else. We do find out that with the way Gladney treats Big John and the things that Edna Earle says about Narcisse, that I think that Southern racism, or racism more generally, is being put on trial. I think the kind of materialism, the material girl Bonnie D, and the kind of society which values the material as opposed to Uncle Daniel, who can give it all away, is being put on trial. I think Uncle Daniel's misogyny and the misogyny of the whole society more generally is on trial. The only way to deal with his wife is to tickle her as if she's a child, or to Bonnie D's inability to act as an adult, Edna Earle's using the conventions, the Southern conventions, to be the power behind the throne. All of those things, it seems to me, are on trial. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up was the whole issue of the heart. And is it the ponder heart, that is a ponderous large heart, or is it pondering, thinking, and heart? Are those two things being engaged in? Why this title, The Ponder Heart? So maybe I'll let y'all talk about that. And if you disagree with me on the trial or want to make me modify what I've said, reject what I've said, please do that too. So what about the Ponder Heart? Anybody want to talk about the title? Why this title?
Well, just one little thing. I've never heard anybody mention, maybe all of y'all are pagans or heathens or something, but in the King James Bible, it says that when Mary was told that she was going to give birth to a child, even though there was no man, that she pondered these things in her heart. That was the phrase that first came to mind when I saw this first title back a million years ago.
Thank you, Alec. I feel kind of dim-witted that I hadn't thought of that. Uh, uh, but
Maybe you're just a pagan.
are you casting Uncle Daniel as the baby Jesus?
Nah, it's hard to do. That's hard to do. Except that he did give everything away, whereas Edna Earl talks as if property ownership is a pretty darn important thing.
Yeah.
The two of them were very different in that respect.
Yeah.
As also Jesus gave his life for your and my salvation, that sort of thing. But that's the only connection I see.
All right, thanks. Joe Ellen and then Susan. Whoops, we're not hearing you, Joe Ellen.
Sorry. I want to mention the cross between the notion of pondering something and a trial, because a trial is really making examination before determination is made, trying something out, etc. And I think that the pondering part of the title, whether it's a pondering heart, is another question. But there's definitely an irony there, because on the one hand, Edna Earl seems to ponder a lot of things, but in order to reflect or contemplate, you need some silence generally before you make certain decisions. And I think that Edna Earl is kind of stuck in the same track. So anyway, I think the whole notion of pondering is fairly ironic.
All right, yeah, Susan.
I was thinking of it. I was kind of following what Alex said about, I did also think about the Bible verse and pondering, and how I wasn't thinking about ponderous and heavy, but more lighthearted, and how Daniel thought about all these other people, but not really about the future or what the next generation was going to do, but that he always had the people that didn't have as much at heart.
Yeah. And Grandpa, for instance, who dies of a heart attack, is much more minding the business line, the rational aspects of things than Uncle Daniel, who is much more spontaneous, intuitive. And then Bonnie D, she's pretty calculating herself. And she also, they're trying to say, was perhaps her heart attack as a result of the Powerball. Pearl.
Just a couple of things on, I like how Joellen was making us think about this in a very large way. And the idea of pondering is actually the opposite of at the trial. At the trial, you present facts and you try to convince, or pondering has this nice sort of openness to it, whether you're thinking about it. But I think it's also really interesting to note the irony or the comic aspect of this. And again, this is what Welty does every day, every page, every piece. She gives us multiple questions and multiple meanings all the way through.
Thank you. Bill. We're not hearing you, Bill. You're muted. Nope. Still can't hear you. No. Oh, no, I can't. We can't do without this, Bill. Come on.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna, thanks for sending me an unmute. Yeah, two thoughts about the trial. I thought the whole novella was about the trial, that from Edna Earl, the defense attorney's perspective as defending the family. So the first part of it was the opening arguments of her defense of the family. And then the trial, the actual trial itself, were the closing arguments from Edna Earl, the defense attorney for the family, where she's trying to defend the family's honor. And then the ponder heart, basically Uncle Daniel killed both his father and his wife, with his actions. And they were kind of amusing, those actions, but his father died when he married Bonnie D, and then Bonnie D died when he tickled her to death. So, the Ponder heart, it could be thought of that Uncle Daniel didn't have one. He didn't give any thought to anything, and he didn't consider anything that he was doing from his heart's perspective, and that burden was carried by Edna Earl. She had the Ponder heart. She thought of it all. She tried to consider everything when it came to the family. So anyway, just a couple thoughts.
I think that's interesting because he is responsible for those deaths, although unintentionally responsible. Yep, Joellen.
I think it was when Grandpa Ponder learned that the marriage was a trial,
Right.
that's what killed him.
Mhm.
And in fact, trials are trying something, trying out ideas, making inquiries before a verdict is approached. And that would be antithetical to the Ponder's notion that life is the same, that it's not fluid and changing, whereas the notion of a trial is threatening to that.
So the Ponders are not pondering; they are
Pretty much.
yeah. Pearl?
I think Bill, I'm sorry to say, I think they were a little harsh on that. I mean, Grandpa Ponder is old, and he could go any day. And you're accepting the fact that the tickling to death killed her. But anyway, I think what is really interesting here, what I would go back to, is to think about, what about Edna Earl Ponder's heart? In multiple ways. So just keeping it complicated.
Yeah, and Uncle Daniel, I think, is if you think about his interactions with Big John and with Narcissus, with Edna Earl, with the community, with the children. I mean, I don't think we see him as in quite as dire terms as Bill was suggesting. Yeah. Anything else about this? We haven't resolved anything, but that's okay too. Do you want to move to the next topic and think about the two works together? The Robber Bridegroom and the Ponder Heart. Do they take up any issues that are similar to each other? Are there some links between them? And then we can talk about divergences. Laura?
Well, I was just looking back, and I wasn't able to be a part of the conversations with about the Robber Bridegroom, but thank you for recording those. But I was just taking a look back through my notes, and one of the passages that I had highlighted was on page 43, where there's that wonderful line that says, "But then the heart cannot live without something to sorrow and be curious over." Mm-hmm. And I thought that for me summed up so many elements in the Ponder heart that we've been talking about. We have been curious. There are so many things to be curious about. So I liked that kind of brought me back into the Robber Bridegroom.
I'm trying to find the passage so we can look at it. On 43?
On page 43, yeah. About halfway down.
Just before the space break.
Okay. Mm-hmm. The only thing that could possibly keep her from being really happy was that she had never seen her lover's face. But then the heart cannot live without something to sorrow and be curious over. All right. So, Laura, you think this is a key to both works?
It brought me back in, and I guess that question. Well, and then also the line that Jamie says earlier. He says, "Guilt is a burdensome thing to carry about in the heart." For some reason, I had highlighted those two passages about the heart, and it made me think about Daniel and his heart, and thinking he doesn't carry. Yes, he is responsible in some way, even indirectly, like we were saying, for two deaths, but he's not carrying it. To me, I don't think he's carrying that guilt. He doesn't have the burden. his
he
heart
doesn't
doesn't
have
have
a
that
burden.
heaviness.
Yeah, his heart is not heavy partly because he hasn't pondered pondered this. Yeah. Any other things that you think link the two novellas? One published in 1942, the other in 1954, so a decade apart. But are there common themes here seen from different perspectives? Joe Ellen? Whoops, we can't hear you.
I'll continue just a little on what we've been talking about. I mentioned that trials can be unstable, destabilizing, and Edna Earle and the Ponders seem absolutely entrenched on the past and the way that life should be. And there's a lot more silence in the Robber Bridegroom. We don't get any silence much in Edna Earle's pondering. We're told that when she needs to be alone, her escape is reading directions, which remains a kind of escape. So silence is not without meaning. And Edna Earle seems to fear silence. So if she's not busy talking, she's reading directions or something. So anyway, that's a huge difference, the narrators, the narratives, and
Right.
what that implies.
The entrenched ponders might suggest something about the entrenched views of Salome. I don't know. Bill?
Well, Robert Bridegroom was a really nice parallel to Psyche and Cupid. So you have an ancient myth that she modernized and put into a Southern setting, and she did a great job with it. So I was looking for parallels to fairy tales within the Ponder Heart, and the ones that came to mind were Sleeping Beauty. With Bonnie D being awakened by Uncle Daniel, and I guess a Beauty and the Beast in some regards, with Uncle Daniel being the Beast, and with a twist, of course, on that story. I didn't see as much of a fairy tale or a myth setting, if you will, in the Ponder Heart as I did with the other one.
No, I don't see it either. Yeah.
But the great stories, they're both great stories, and they have a female as the hero role in both of them.
I think that's something we might consider. What about the women and issues of women's agency? What do we do? Both. We have Salome and Rosamond. We have Bonnie D and Edna Earle. Are similar issues being investigated in terms of women's rights, women's access to power, women's freedom? Certainly, Salome wants to take power, doesn't she? She's demanding power. Rosamond is resourceful, but she's also keeping house for the robbers, playing a traditional role. Bonnie D is trying to establish her independence through shopping, through spending, by sending Uncle Daniel away. Their power over him. Edna Earle ostensibly is taking care of the family, staying in her family role, but she's, I think, looking for her own form of control as she's doing that. Are those issues, do you think those issues link the two books? Question of women. Joe Ellen?
Actually, that isn't what I was going to comment on.
Go
Except that both
go.
novels are set during just extreme periods of change. I think that the article on historicizing Ponderheart, I can't, what's her name? Forgot it.
Julia Eichelberger.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Julia Eichelberger notes that she thought there was more change during Edna Earle's lifetime in the 20th century than at any other point in Mississippi. But you might want to counter that with thinking about the era of the frontier too, and the robber bridegroom. So huge social upset and social changes.
Yeah, both of them set during times of tremendous change. The transformation of the frontier into a cotton-dominated economy, the rise of the merchant class, versus the rise of mechanical cotton pickers, the great migration away from Mississippi, the building of roads, passing of the coming of electricity, of the telephone, all of those things that Julia talks about are in the 40s and the 50s, tremendously important. Yeah. Pearl.
I think the question of thinking about Rosamond and Edna Earle is just really fascinating. They both take charge. They both bend the truth or lie or say what needs to be said for their own survival, for their own point of view. And so I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about these two novels together. I was kind of going in the other direction to think about the source materials that Welty is using in each one of these, and that the Robber Bridegroom is history and fairy and folktale. It's placed in a specific place that she can draw on all of those things. It's about Mississippi, but also New Orleans, about the frontier and so on and so forth. So she's drawing on all these other texts and tales, whereas Ponder Heart strikes me as she's drawing on her observations of the contemporary world. It could be anywhere, really. I mean, there are Southernisms, certainly, and Kingsley Amis tries to, he is negative about the Ponder Heart, and he tries to make it ring like a hokey Southern thing by saying you all, you hyphen ALL 3 times in this little tiny review. But it's about family relationships that anybody can relate to. I mean, probably everybody says, oh yeah, I've got an aunt like that, or I've got somebody like that. So it's a difference to me on drawing on these historical texts and tales and legends versus drawing on one's contemporary observations of people.
Right. Now, one reason that Welty did not write about the contemporary world in 1942 was that it was something that she just did not want to write about. She was so consumed with worry about friends and her brothers and the course of the war that she didn't want to talk about contemporary world right then, and so she talked about history instead. Post-war, she's looking at it more directly. I don't think because she talks about history, though, that she's avoiding contemporary issues. We might want to talk about that. I think she's turned to history, but I think it's a way of distancing herself from the contemporary world and still writing about it with some less torment, perhaps. Pearl, did you have?
Might you say the same thing then about 1954 and the Ponder Heart, to be able to talk locally rather than what was happening in the world, as she talks about in Place and Fiction, that the world go up with nuclear explosions.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it could be a way of getting at similar issues in a domestic way rather than focusing on international questions. Yeah.
And she has different audiences for each time that she's writing. I mean, thinking about writing, dedicating it to John Robinson and, like enjoying that history and legend versus reading it to the Maxwells and hearing it makes it so funny. I mean, she's got a different audience for each one.
Yeah. The dedication to the Maxwells and Mary Lou Aswell, literary It's interesting, isn't it? A more literary dedication there than a personal one. Although they were great friends as well, very great friends. Yeah. Let's go to Laura and then Jo Ellen.
I just had a quick question about the dedication, actually, because I was just curious about Catherine Ann Porter, because the Robert Bridegroom was dedicated to her, I think I saw in the Modern Library edition. And since we had talked about that in the past and that came up, I was just curious what Porter's response was, if there was any. Just curious.
I'm looking. I'm drawing a blank right now.
That's correct. It is to Porter. I made the mistake.
Okay.
For
Yeah.
John Hutchinson.
Yeah. So to Catherine Ann Porter would be in view of the support that Catherine Ann Porter had given her early in her career, I think trying to help her become published at the start, putting her in touch with Ford Maddox Ford, then writing the introduction for A Curtain of Green. And you wouldn't want to dedicate I think the book to the person who's writing the introduction. And then, so the very next novel dedicated, I think Delta Wedding is dedicated to John Robinson. Isn't that right, Pearl? I have to look at the dedications, but yeah. So that's why, Laura. Is that a good enough answer? Okay.
No, that makes sense. I had the chronology off. I hadn't realized that was.
I had forgotten about it. Yeah. Jo Ellen.
I just took a look, and Ponderheart is dedicated to Mary Louise Aswell and William and Emily Maxwell, other major supporters of her career. But I really want to, especially when you're talking about women, want to throw in here Edna Earle's name. I do not know St. Elmo very well myself, but in terms of source material, how important do we think it might be? And I've been interested a long time. I bit by bit try to inform myself about the 19th century American women writers, especially, that sometimes Welty seems to be reacting against, spoofing. But the more we look at them, the more important we see they were in terms of making social commentary and establishing gender roles. And Welty grew up very in the wake of a lot of that writing. And I know Edna Earle, had a kind of reputation in the South, but I wondered whether it goes any deeper than just making a joke about the title.
Now, I too think I'm going to have to read St. Elmo one of these days. But Edna Earle and St. Elmo, just based on what I've read about it, is the virtuous heroine who saves the dissolute roue. And so she's the woman who saves the men from themselves, from their, brings them back from their worst nature to virtue. And so we have Edna Earle. I mean, I think she's very consciously chosen that name because it is so popular in the South, but also because Edna Earle sees herself sort of as the salvation of her family and of the men in her family, if not in the way that Edna Earle, the original Edna Earle, was, except in another fashion, I would. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's plot level. Where Jane Austen felt everybody had to get married at the end of her novels, even though they're pretty anti-romantic aspects there. So I really, maybe we'll do that, Suzanne, read St. Elmo, because there's a whole lot more in those pages. And I'd like to know how, whether Edna Earle is the kind of prig we sort of assume she is, or how much more complicated she is.
Let's all do it. Let's read St. Elmo. I don't know that we want to talk about it, but spend a book club on it, but we can find out what we're talking about here. Alec, have you read St. Elmo?
No.
Okay.
I was going to say about Edna Earle. Can I be heard?
Sure. Yeah.
That her name is two men's names, Ed and Earl.
Mm-hmm.
And while we're on the subject, and of course, she seems like I'm the one in charge here. If you want to come into this hotel, you got to go through me. That's her attitude. And I'll even make the point that Uncle Daniel was kind of a closeted gay guy. He doesn't love Bonnie D in the way that a man loves a woman. That's why it must be so easy for him to move away. Uh, anyway, just bringing up those topics.
All right. I want us to think about the robber bridegroom and the time of composition influence on its text. What about, here's what historian Alan Bullock said about Adolf Hitler. So we're thinking she's writing this early in the 40s. There is a Hegelian echo in Hitler's belief about himself. He came to believe that he was a man with a mission marked out by providence and therefore exempt from the ordinary canons of human conduct. He was in his own mind the Siegfried come to reawaken Germany to greatness, for whom morality, suffering, and the litany of private virtues were irrelevant. He saw himself as the agent of what Hegel would have called the will of the world spirit. So here is Eudora Welty living in a world in which Hitler threatens the entire world with this kind of attitude. Do you think the robber bridegroom is in retreat from confronting that kind of world in which she's living, or is it confronting it obliquely? Is she fleeing? Is this a work of escapism, or is she dealing with this the issues like these? What do you think? Anybody? Pearl, thank you. Whoops, we can't hear you. Are you now? I think now you're okay.
Mm-mm.
No, I know you don't like silence, so I'll just jump in.
Yeah, no, silence. Joel, and silence is my enemy.
In these anyway.
Yeah.
Even as you said that she was writing about the past so that she didn't have to face the future, she's way too astute and intelligent and wise even to try to ignore what was happening. And if we think about all of the evil and murder and rape and misguided leadership, the masking, everything about it could be interpreted as a contemporary view of the dangers that are passing by.
One of the great dangers in the robber bridegroom seems to me is Salome's notion that whatever she wants, she has a right to, and that in fact, if the son insults her, she'll stop it. You know, she plays God. She is like the fisherman and his wife, where the final act of the wife is to want to take the place of God, and then she's reduced back to where she was in the beginning. And so that notion of that kind of exertion of power and the dangers of that kind of exertion of power and the dangers for the United States and the future of the United States from people who exerted power in that way. Another one would be Little Harp killing and raping the Indian maiden, and Jamie Lockhart being kind of Jamie Lockhart's alter ego, and that not having any kind of moral culpability, willing to do anything for himself. And so there is this kind of, yeah, I think you're right, Pearl, this pattern of leadership that's dangerous that we're seeing on the international scene, and now we're placing it in American history and thinking about it in terms of American history. Alec and then Pearl.
And in that same vein, Jamie Lockhart becomes a merchant in New Orleans and makes money. And it seems less exciting than life was out on the Natchez Trace. As an old lefty, I can't help observing that wars, economic causes, and greed, from my lefty point of view, are often seen as causes of war.
Yeah, and that Jamie Lockhart is probably no more scrupulous as a merchant than he was as a robber.
We
he,
steal with style, he
he's
says.
still, yeah, he's still stealing. Some men will rob you with a shotgun and some with a fountain pen. He's got the fountain pen now, I think. Yeah, Pearl?
I think Susan Wood wrote a piece for the Eudora Welty Review about Robert Bridegroom and fascism. So
Mhm.
I'll try to look that up and
Yeah.
send it forward.
I know I talked about it too. So a long time ago in my book about Welty's fiction. The other thing I want to say is that here we've got anti-Semitism playing out in Europe. The horrors that of Nazi Germany. And in this novel, we have what's happening to the Native American people. You know, they will come back no matter how hard we stomp upon them. That assumption of superiority, of white power, white supremacy, here, I think, is running through this novel as well. And so she's not confronting the horrors of Hitler's Germany directly, but she is talking about the kind of racist undercurrent in American society that is not totally divorced from what's going on in Europe. You know. Anything else? So if we're historicizing the Ponder Heart, which I think is a great thing to do, I think we can historicize the Robert Bridegroom in terms of the contemporary, it's of American history, but also in terms of the world in which Welty was living at the time she was writing. Pearl, did you get a citation for us? Oops.
Oh, I didn't, but I think most of the reviews, I was looking at the reviews collected in the contemporary reviews, which is always to me interesting to see how other people read it. Most of the reviewers read the Robert Bridegroom for the comedy. But I thought that this was a really interesting mention. I would never have thought of it. But Marianne Hauser writes Nietzsche, which I'd never thought about Nietzsche and Welty. Nietzsche once wrote that in every man there was a child that wished to play, which also I wouldn't have known Nietzsche said that. Those who don't want to give the child in them a happy chance wouldn't like the tale about Rosamond and her robber bridegroom and shouldn't read it. But then at the other end of the scale, there's Lionel Trilling, who was never a fan of anybody's that I can tell. He says, she's written of those fabrications of fantasy which have so tempted two other gifted women of our time, Eleanor Wiley with her Venetian glass nephew and her Mr. Hazard and Mr. Hodge, and Virginia Woolf with her Orlando, very artful and delicate works, very remote and aloof, though passionately connected in secret ways with the lives of the authors themselves, and very exasperating in their inevitably coy mystification. That sounds so like Lionel Trilling, if you know, but that idea that it's about the authors themselves, that this is really about Welty, is kind of interesting, even if, as he's saying, it's negatively.
Didn't Diana Trilling call it escapism? I have a vague memory of that, so yeah. Oh, all right. We have 15 minutes left. We can talk about any other issues you would like to talk about, or we can call ourselves to an early close. Anyone want to raise any other issues here?
I was just typing in the chat, but I'll go ahead and say it to avoid typing out. I found Eudora Welty's challenge to fascism in the Robert Bridegroom in volume 7, the 2015 Eudora Welty review, and I'll work on getting that for the group.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Anna. Susan.
Well, can we get a hint about next time, or are y'all going to let us know?
I was going to ask you all about it too. I think we're going to do a novel by Jesmyn Ward next time.
Oh,
we haven't decided which one to do. So
Oh,
if we could do Salvage the Bones, we could do Sing
my favorite.
Unburied Sing, or we could choose Let Us Descend, the most recent of the novels. We'd be interested, we might do a straw poll. Does anyone, some of you may have already discussed, I know that we did, I think when Susan, didn't we do it when we were still meeting in person? Didn't we do Sing Unburied Sing?
Or do we? I
Maybe-
really like Salvage the Bones the best, but we've done Sing Unburied Sing, and the new one is more difficult and has some other issues. So I think either I love picking her as the author, and I think any of them would be good.
Anyone will take comments here.
I'm happy to send out a poll if
That's a good
people.
idea. Let's do that. Let's have
Okay.
a poll. And
Okay.
then we may poll someone else of note to see what the recommendation is. So we'll be back in touch with you about that. But that will be our next one. And Anna, we're going to take a break until January. Is that right?
Yes, I think until the new year, we're going to get through Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays peacefully, and then start back up in the new year.
You did a great job.
Pearl, did you have something?
Yes, I just wanted to say two other things about the Ponder Heart from out of the reviews, if I might.
Yeah.
The Charles Poor, who was not necessarily always a good reader or a friendly reader of Welty's, he says that Miss Welty's South is the same South William Faulkner writes about, but he is by turns the South's Beethoven and Wagner, where she is unfailingly Mozartian. So just giving us something, those people who immediately understand what Mozart and versus Wagner and Beethoven. I thought that was interesting. And then I want, if you would indulge me, I'll read V.S. Pritchett's. This before I think they were good friends, because before that comes a little bit later, I think. But his description of Edna Earl says, Uncle Daniel is in a complex position in the narrative. He is embedded in the mind of a bustling, hoydenish, bossy niece, a girl of fierce practical capacity, snooty manners, and possessive temperament, who will scornfully defend the old idiot, partly because she passionately loves him, partly to keep her head up among the neighbors.
Yeah. Eudora Welty and V.S. Pritchett later became great friends. And at the time Pritchett wrote that review, William Maxwell didn't think he had been effusive enough in his praise, but that was pretty good, I thought.
Don't you think Welty would have loved that description, though?
Oh, yes. All right. So we've had two very different novels, both accomplished. I have to say that I really, particularly, I've always loved The Robber Bridegroom. I have never been the greatest fan of The Ponder Heart, so I really enjoyed reading it again and reading it slowly and with you all and talking about it and thinking it through. And I have a renewed appreciation for it. So it's been fun to look at these two together and to take it slowly. In fact, reading slowly is such a good experience. I don't ever want to read any other way. I think no, I like doing this. I'll give you one last chance before we'll sign off. We'll be in touch by our straw poll that Anna is going to take, and we'll see you all again. Oh, it's going to be a withdrawal here. Not January. All right. Going once, going twice. All right, Anna, I'll sign it over to you.
All righty. Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys for joining us for this session of Welty at Home. Keep an eye out, as Suzanne mentioned, for the final newsletter with the final recording. And I will also put a link to a poll about which Jesmyn Ward book we would like most to read for the next session. So with that, thank you guys so much for coming, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.